Alrighty, hello everybody. The background you're looking at is a game I used to play when I was a kid called Lemmings. You know, there was an episode, there used to be a show called Air Crash Investigation. There was also a show called Mayday. It was about, air crash investigations, famous plane crashes and whatnot, and the subsequent investigations into them. And I saw this one episode where a plane took off, I think it was from Canada, and unbeknownst to the pilots and everybody on board the plane, there was a jet fuel leak, okay? The plane was leaking fuel at about, 5 to 10 times the speed that it should have been. And they were flying across the Atlantic Ocean, and, they were, a quarter of the way across the Atlantic, and then all of a sudden the fuel lights come on. Now, at first the pilot just assumed it was a computer glitch, the fuel lights are on, but obviously we have enough fuel. But then all of a sudden both engines went out. Well, one engine went out, then a minute later the other engine went out. So the pilot was basically forced to accept the fact that his plane had run out of fuel across the Atlantic Ocean. Now, as it turned out, the plane actually survived the trip because in a stroke of just extreme serendipity, totally fortuitous luck, they just so happened to be about 500 miles from a tiny set of islands in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And the pilot, once both engines went out, and it was just this dark, eerily silent glider, with no lights, nothing, no engine sound, just a silent glider through the air at night at 35,000 feet. The pilot, he managed to, because he could still steer the plane, kind of like a car that's switched off. You can still turn the steering wheel in some cars. He managed to glide the plane to safety and saved all 300 people on board. And just basically crash landed on this tiny runway. But just imagine the horror, man. You're flying over the Atlantic Ocean in the middle of the night, and you're the pilot, and then all of a sudden you run out of fuel. Both engines fail. Okay, not you're about to run out of fuel. You've just run out of fuel. Both engines have failed, and now you're just a glider slowly sinking towards the ground. Imagine that feeling. And I was thinking about this, right? I was thinking about it. It's kind of a metaphor. This metaphor of the plane that's run out of fuel over the ocean. It's kind of a metaphor for being trapped as a wage slave. It's kind of a metaphor for being an adult. You leave the airport with a fuel tank full of gas, right? Full of jet fuel. You graduate high school and you've got your whole life ahead of you, or maybe you go to college and you've got your whole life ahead of you. You think you've got a full tank of gas, and you take off over the ocean. You get a job or whatever. You think is a good job. And then you're flying over the ocean, and you make it to the age of about 27, 28 years old, and all of a sudden you realize that the fuel lights are on. Okay, you realize that you're trapped in a dead-end job, and you've got 40 years of wage slavery ahead of you. And of course, what a lot of people do, what a lot of guys do, for example, is, they're 27, 28 years old, the fuel lights are on. They know that by the time they're 30, they'll be out of fuel, and they're looking around for islands. They're looking at the radar, looking for islands. They can see on the radar that just behind them, a few hundred miles on the radar where they've just flown over, they can see Learn to Code Island. And of course, for women, there is OnlyFans Island, but OnlyFans Island's very small, and there's a lot of people on it. There's a lot of women on that island. Anyway, so as I was saying, right, people are coasting through the air on a plane that's run out of fuel. They're coasting through adulthood, working a wage slave job, a dead-end job, and they're looking for a place to land, okay? It's too late to circle the plane back and go to Learn to Code Island. There is a peninsula way off into the horizon. It's become a live streamer peninsula, but again, they can't get there either. Too far away. That might not go well. So they feel trapped. They're trapped in wage slavery. So what do? If you're 25, 35, 45, it doesn't matter how old you are, if you're trapped in a dead-end job, What's the solution for you? Well, if you go on YouTube, there are all these videos. There's countless numbers of these videos of these guys talking about how they quit their job, bro. You know, I was working this really bad job that was making me miserable, and then one day I quit. And as I'm watching these videos, I'm thinking to myself, like, oh, gee, thanks. You know, I'm sure people never thought of that. You know, I'm sure no one thought about the fact that their life would be less stressful if they didn't have to work, if they could just quit their jobs, bro. In fact, I remember I was watching like some documentary or some expose into poverty in India, and there was this guy, he was like 60 years old, and he had spent 40 years living on the side of the road, working 16-hour days, where if a truck would break down in 45 degrees Celsius heat, he would repair it with scraps of metal and stuff that he had. You know, like he had a scrap yard on the side of the road, and he would just repair broken down vehicles for 16 hours a day, his whole life. You know, maybe that guy just needs to quit his job. So, you know, you're not going to get too much help by these videos that are just like, oh, is your job making you miserable? Really? Well, have you considered the fact that you could quit your job and you won't be stressed anymore? So, yeah, those are a lot of help. But the question remains, what do you do? And, well, the answer is obviously complicated, but the first thing I'll say is that, and I think I've mentioned this before, they did like not a poll, but they conducted a kind of like a poll where they asked people who were at the end of their life, you know, people that were basically on their deathbed, and they said, what are your biggest regrets in life? You know, how would you have lived your life differently? And the most common answer that people gave was that they wish they hadn't worked so hard. They wish they hadn't devoted so much of their life to working. And that kind of leads into like something else, right? You know, a lot of people will be very poor for a period of their life, right? They'll be very poor because they're not earning much money. You know, maybe they're working part-time or they have like a really low-paying job, and they're only earning like, I don't know, $30,000 in the West, right? But then what happens is that all of a sudden they get a better job or they get a promotion or something. Now they're making $50,000 a year. And what they do is they start relaxing a little bit, okay? Before, you know, when they were earning $30,000 a year, they were living in a tiny shoebox or living with their parents and eating ramen noodles or whatever. But now that they're earning $50,000, they get like a nicer place and they buy fancier clothes or whatever. And then they get a bigger pay rise, you know, $70K a year. And now they're eating out every night and they're buying their girlfriend presents and whatnot. They're spending all of this extra money because they're saving the same amount of money. They're just spending more on stuff they don't need now that they have this surplus of money. But the thing is, right, most people don't really, and now look, this is maybe a little bit skewed right now because of rent prices and whatnot. Property prices are making the cost of living more expensive. But, you know, historically, it really doesn't cost that much just to live like a quiet life, right? Like, right now, I am working between 27 and 30 hours per week, okay? I work a maximum of 30 hours per week. Now, granted, my cost of living is relatively low, okay, apart from property taxes, which have gone up recently. I don't have to worry. But I'm saving hundreds of dollars a week working 30 hours a week because I don't drink, you know, except very, very occasionally. And nor do I buy, you know, expensive clothes like I once upon a time did. You know, I look back when I was younger, I spent so much money I didn't need to on fancy clothes because I thought, I don't know, there was just some thought in my mind that if I could afford to buy the expensive jeans, and I may as well just splash out and buy them, and not considering the fact that I get nothing out of it. But yeah, man. In fact, the only thing I really kind of spend more than what I need to on is food, because I'm a bit of a foodie. I love Indian curry and Italian food and whatnot, so I go out quite a bit more than what I need to. But, you know, I have the choice of saving $400 a week by eating cheaply, by eating white rice and, peanut butter and whole milk, I can save $400 a week, or I can save $200 a week and eat out quite a bit. And I chose the latter. But, a lot of people, however much money they're making, even if it's way more than what they need to, they just spend all of it on those extra goodies because they can afford to. It's kind of a boomer, it's a thing that the boomers used to do. Terms like keeping up with the Joneses. It's a very boomer-esque mentality. Now, I'm not going to go full zoomer and be like, bro, every cent you earn, you should be putting in your crypto wallet, bro, and you should be saving, you should be buying some Bitcoin, bro, with that money, okay? No. Keith Woods made a video years ago, and he nailed it, okay? He absolutely nailed it. He talked about how there's this mentality in the West, right? Well, it's all over the world. Japan has it, China has it, the West, America certainly has it. There's this ontological default concept in the West that people who work are citizens and the people who don't work are non-citizens. And all of the political discourse is filtered through the idea of the working class or the middle class and, making things easier for the hard-working middle class and helping the middle class get more of their money back. Of course, they don't mean it, but that's the way that politicians, when they're trying to get elected, they frame everything through, we're gonna help people, we're gonna help single mothers who work 2 jobs to buy their own home. They never frame it through, we're gonna help single mothers who work 2 jobs to only have to work 30 hours a week and still be able to rent. Okay, they never frame it that way. All right, if you stood up at a town hall meeting and said to some politician that's trying to get elected, I work 45 hours a week at a wage cage job and I can't afford a home, what are you going to do for me? They would often give you some stump speech about how they're going to create some program that allows people who work 45 hours a week at a wage cage job to afford a home. They're going to bring down property prices so you can buy your own home and keep working 45 hours a week. All right, you'd never hear them say like, oh, I don't think you should have to work 2 jobs. I don't even think you should have to work 1 full-time job. You should be able to get by working 30 hours a week. Okay, you never hear them come at it from that perspective. It's always like, well, it sucks as a single mother that you should work 2 jobs. I think that you should be able to afford a home working 2 jobs. But yeah, it's just this really messed up mentality that we have. And this is like the one element of the political left that I do agree with. When I hear like, the David Pacmans of the world talk about how there should, why have we abandoned the concept of the 4-day work week? If you actually study the numbers, it's proven that about 10 to 15 hours of the work week are unproductive. The employees will work productively until about the 28-hour mark, and then they become unproductive because they're overworked. So if we just stopped making people work those unproductive extra hours, the economy would not take much of a hit, and corporations wouldn't actually lose that much money. But, of course, it's not like that. We have this ridiculous, you have to be at the office 5 days a week for 8 hours. It's backwards, and it's counterproductive, and it leads to lower happiness levels. So I've been rabbiting, I'm going on and on and on. So how does this help you, the listener? Okay. Well, the first thing I will say, even if you have escaped the Matrix right now, even if you have, I don't know, become like a live streamer or something, even if you have escaped the Matrix for the time being, accept the fact that there's a good chance in the future that you will have to spend some time in the wage slave. Give up this boomer mentality of like, I have to work 40 hours a week. I just have to find the job that makes me happy, bro. There are very few jobs except for fun, genuinely fun jobs. There are very few jobs out there that are genuinely fun to be at for 40 hours a week. So try and abandon that mentality of the fulfilling job, all right? Very rarely is there an actual wage cage job that's genuinely fulfilling, or even a business that's fulfilling. I mean, don't get me wrong. If you find a genuinely happy wage cage, then climb in it. If you find something that genuinely makes you happy that you do full time, ignore everything I'm saying. But if you can't seem to find it, give up on it. Because the truth is, for most people, their happiness levels or their happiness itself occurs outside of work, okay? Again, it's a very boomerish kind of mindset that you find a job that makes you happy. Those jobs are out there. There's jobs out there that people, do enjoy, I suppose. But for most people, your happiness will be outside of work. And you can probably test this right now on yourself. Think of the happiest days of your life, the happiest moments of your life. You might have been at school, but you certainly weren't working. I guarantee almost none of you will say that the happiest moments of your life were at work. Work is just not a source of happiness. So don't try and find the fulfilling job per se. Try and focus on a way to earn as much money as you need to be at work for as little amount of time as possible. I mean, even right now, I'm working 6 hours a day, and it's great. Okay, I work from like the early afternoon to the early evening time, so the mornings are free because I'm a night owl. Naturally, I'm like a night person. I'll never be that guy that gets up. Those grind set bros that talk about having your circadian rhythm to reflect like the sunlight. Going to bed when it gets dark and waking up when the sun comes up. That will never ever 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 be me. Okay, I'm a 2 a.m. till 10 a.m. kind of sleeper. Just the way I'll always be. If you're a natural morning person, if you're a 5:30 a.m. starter, more power to you. But anyway, I think I've sort of made my point in this video. I think I'm sort of starting to ramble at this point. But yeah, working 6 hours a day, it's great because I know I've got 18 of those hours to myself. And I don't come home feeling tired. Because if you work 8 hours, it's like, okay, fine, you've still got 16 hours to yourself. But oftentimes the time that you come home to the time you go to bed, you're tired. And the hours before you go to work, you're dreading the upcoming rest of the day. So it's not really just 8 out of 16 hours that you're at work. But I find that when you work just part-time, you don't go home feeling tired. And you don't dread going to work as much because you can already see the end of work before you get there. You arrive at work and you've only got 6 hours to go. So I think that less hours is the key. All right, assuming you work a job that you don't like, all right, this is aimed at people who have jobs they don't like, all right. If you have a job that you do like, then none of what I'm saying applies to you, okay, obviously. And I know people will say, well, that's easy for you to say. Like, didn't you inherit some money a while ago? And it's like, yeah, but I was already kind of in that position before I inherited the money. You see, I know it's tough, okay? I know that things are tough out there, but life is so long, okay? Life is so long. You never know where you could be in 10 years' time. You just don't know. And I know I'm going to annoy everybody with a cricket metaphor here. It's kind of like a game of cricket, right? Where the opposition bats first and they post 400 and you think, we're never going to chase this down. Okay, you just have to pace it 5 overs at a time, aka 5 years at a time. All right. If you've never watched a game of cricket in your life, go on YouTube and type in Australia versus South Africa 438 and watch the Guinness World Record run chase where back in 2006, South Africa chased down 434 runs to score 438 at the end of the game, which was like completely unachievable at the time, just inconceivable that they could have possibly done it. But the South Africans, when they got off the field, having conceded 434 runs, which is like in a soccer game, that's like losing 9. You're down 0-9 at the halfway point, and then you finish the game beating the opposition 10-9. That was basically what the game was like when they chased down that 434 runs against Australia. Anyway, that's got nothing to do with what I'm talking about. The point is, just pace yourself 5 overs at a time. Sometimes it feels like, escaping wage slavery is like chasing down 400 runs, but you don't know where you could be by the 35th over, so just pace yourself. The final thing I'll say, though, is for those of you out there that have escaped the matrix, like you genuinely do have millions of dollars or, If you're somebody out there who genuinely never has to get into the wage cage ever again, be grateful, okay? I saw this story regarding Tim Pool. You know Tim Pool, the live streamer who has millions of views, who makes millions of dollars, okay? Tim Pool was making $100,000 a month on top of his tens of thousands he was already making, right? From Russia. And right now he's whining about some law in his state that says he has to pay his employees like a fraction more money. It's like, bro, just shut up and be happy with your life, okay? Like, keep it off the air. Like, you know, people who are multimillionaires complaining about the smallest things, you know? So if you have escaped the Matrix, you should just be happy, okay? You're going to have good days and bad days, but don't let the bad... You know, if you're someone like Tim Pool, don't go on the air with the bad days and complain and whinge about it, okay? Try and read the room, all right? If you're Tim Pool and, you know, you ring the call center and the guy was rude to you, don't go on the air and whinge about it, because it's the guy in the call center who's having the bad day, bro, not you. Some people, they're very out of touch, but I know that's not most of you listening. Anyway, I think I've made my point here. Thanks for listening, guys, and I will, well, hopefully I'll be recording a video very, very soon. So many videos I want to make, but it's just the time, man. So few hours in the day. Thankfully not too many of them at work.